Welcome to Stories by the Fireplace. Sit back, relax, and enjoy the story. The Watcher in the Woods. The golden hues of autumn, leaves flickered in the late afternoon sun as Emily drove down the narrow, winding road that led to the cabin. It had been years since she'd been back to this part of the country, and she wasn't entirely sure why she'd decided to return now. Nostalgia, perhaps, or the need to get away from the suffocating demands of work. The cabin had once belonged to her grandparents, a place she'd visited as a child, but after their passing, it had remained empty, gradually slipping from memory. The road, lined with dense woods on both sides, felt more isolated than she remembered. The trees seemed taller, their branches more tangled, casting long, crooked shadows over the gravel. There was a sense of stillness in the air, broken only by the occasional rustle of leaves or the caw of a distant crow. She rolled down the window slightly, letting the cool autumn breeze drift into the car. It smelled of damp earth and pine needles. When she finally reached the cabin, it stood just as she remembered. A small rustic structure nestled at the edge of the woods. It looked peaceful, but there was something about the way the shadows clung to the corners of the building that made her uneasy. Shaking off the feeling, Emily grabbed her bags and made her way inside. The cabin was musty, but nothing a little airing out wouldn't fix. She set to work opening the windows, letting the crisp air swirl inside. The interior was simple: wooden floors, a stone fireplace, and old, weathered furniture that creaked with age. The fading light outside gave the space a warm amber glow. Emily felt a little more at ease, her earlier unease starting to fade as she unpacked her things. As evening fell, Emily lit a fire in the hearth and settled into an old armchair with a book. The crackle of the fire and the occasional hoot of a knoll from the woods provided a calming soundtrack to the evening. But as she sat there, she became aware of something, a feeling subtle at first, like she was being watched. She glanced up from her book and peered out the window. The forest beyond was a mass of darkness, the trees standing like silent sentinels. She shook her head, dismissing the feeling as paranoia. After all, she was alone here. There was no one for miles. Still, the sensation lingered. The night deepened, and the fire began to die down. Emily decided to head to bed. The old staircase creaked as she ascended to the lofted bedroom. Lying in bed, she stared up at the slanted wooden ceiling, the beams forming strange spider-like shapes in the shadows cast by the moonlight. Just as she was about to drift off, she heard it, a faint, rhythmic tapping. Emily's eyes shot open. The sound was coming from downstairs, from the direction of the front door. Her heart quickened. She listened intently, the tapping continuing, steady and deliberate. She slid out of the bed quietly, grabbing the flashlight from her nightstand. The cabin was old, and sounds could easily be explained by the wind, animals, or the settling of the structure. But something about the precise rhythm of the tapping felt intentional. Creeping down the stairs, she pointed the beam of the light toward the door. The tapping stopped. The silence that followed was thick, pressing against her ears. Slowly, She approached the door and peered through the peephole. There was nothing, just the forest, the trees swaying gently in the breeze. Exhaling shakily, Emily pulled back and bolted the door, just for good measure. She returned to bed, but sleep didn't come easily. Every creak of the house, every rustle of the leaves outside seemed magnified, her nerves taut. Hours later, when she finally drifted into a restless sleep, the dream came. In it, she was standing in the middle of the woods. The air was cold, biting at her skin. The trees loomed overhead, and in the distance, she could hear the faint sound of someone calling her name.
Emily.
The voice was familiar, but she couldn't place it.
Emily.
She tried to move toward it,
Emily.
but the forest seemed to shift around her, the path twisting and changing. Then, out of the darkness, a figure appeared. Tall, with a face hidden in shadow, the figure stood motionless at the edge of her vision, watching. She woke with a start, her heart pounding in her chest. The room was dark, the fire long gone. For a moment, she lay still, trying to shake off the remnants of the dream, but then she heard it again. This time, the sound was closer, coming from one of the windows. Slowly, she turned her head toward the window beside her bed. The moonlight cast long, silvery beams through the glass, illuminating the edges of the curtains. With a sinking feeling, Emily knew she had to look. Her hand trembled as she reached for the curtain. She pulled it back just enough to peek outside. At first, she saw nothing but the woods, tall, dark trees swaying in the wind. But then, just at the edge of the clearing near the tree line, she saw it. A figure, standing perfectly still, its face turned toward the cabin. She froze, her breath catching in her throat. The figure didn't move. It simply stood there, watching her. The darkness obscured its features, but Emily could feel its gaze, cold and unsettling. She quickly dropped the curtain and backed away from the window, her pulse racing. What was that? Who was that? She rushed downstairs, her mind spinning. Grabbing her phone, she saw there was no signal. Of course, this far out, she was cut off from everything. She debated getting into her car and leaving, but something told her the figure might be waiting for that. She spent the rest of the night in the armchair by the dying fire, gripping the flashlight tightly, her eyes darting to the windows every few minutes. The tapping didn't return, but she could still feel the figure out there, lurking just beyond the trees. When dawn finally broke, Emily hurriedly packed her things, her heart pounding in her chest. She couldn't stay another night. As she locked up the cabin and walked toward her car, she cast one last glance toward the woods. For a moment, she thought she saw movement, just a flicker of shadow among the trees. But when she blinked, it was gone. She drove away quickly, the cabin growing smaller in the rear-view mirror. The winding road stretched out before her, the forest on either side feeling oppressive, as though it were closing in. She didn't stop until she reached the highway, her hands trembling on the steering wheel. It wasn't until she reached the city that she finally allowed herself to breathe. But as she parked her car and stepped out, she caught a glimpse of something in the rear-view mirror. Just a fleeting shadow, barely perceptible. the same figure watching her still. Thank you for watching. I hope you enjoyed the story. If you did, make sure to like it and check out my other stories by the fireplace. Your support means so much, and I can't wait to see you next time. Bye bye!